Welcome, everyone. Good afternoon for those who are in Europe. Good morning in America, and well, good evening for those who are in the eastbound part of Europe. Welcome to the International Symposium on Anarchist and Libertarian Principles of Education that is going to be held in memory of Antonio Benaiges on the 19th anniversary of his murder. This symposium is organized by the University of Burgos in Spain with the collaboration of AS Neill Summerhill CIC from United Kingdom. And this symposium is supported by the Vice Rectorate for Institutional Relations, Culture and Social Outreach. So we're glad of their support to let us come together today for the celebration of this symposium. Okay. Well, my name is Miguel Corbí. I'm a professor in the University of Burgos, and my field of knowledge is usually related to inclusion. But right now, we are developing different activities related to anarchist and libertarian principles of education from different angles with different activities. In this case, we want to share space for discussion through the celebration of this symposium that intends to be a place of mind about everything related to alternative education. Well, this symposium was born because we detected different important and remarkable points in education, like that we are facing current challenges in education. You know that we are living a convulsive moment right now, and maybe it's time for us to rethink a little bit the way to get across all that traditions, all that knowledge to our students. And of course, we detected as well the need for alternative perspective when things are getting worse and worse. So despite it could be something very, very current all around the history, right now could be a very important moment, even more important than in other moments. So that's why we decided to create an international initiative as this symposium is, completely online, completely open, completely free, with annual vocations. So we expect to have different editions in the future as well, and trying to combine theory and practice. So everything that could be related to those principles and to those alternative education are going to be really, really welcome. Well, the mission of the symposium is just to open a space for dialogue, reflection, exchange, and the nature of this space is non-policy driven. This is important to understand because when we talk about anarchism, sometimes we have some misunderstandings. Not closed or dogmatic, of course. It's going to be absolutely open for all thinkers, but of all perspectives that could be related with those principles, and with plural mood as well for welcoming those perspectives that could be sometimes a little bit tricky to spread in our society. Well, let me remind you a little bit the house rules for this symposium. You should have the cameras off, your microphones mute, and the questions could be asked via chat. So after the speeches, we are gonna have some time for moderating different questions. So just send us your questions through the chat to the organizers, and then we'll manage as best as we can. In order for you to get the most accessibility possible here, the session will include artificial intelligence generated captions. So just go below to your screen and check the CC button to try to transcribe all the conversation. You can follow the whole conversation or just the subtitles. It is up to you. And I have to remember you that it's been this session is being recorded and will be published in the YouTube channel by the University of Burgos. After a couple of days, I guess you are going to receive your attendance certificate in certificates in your mailbox with the account that you refer in your registration form. Well, let me go over the agenda. Very, very brief. We are going to start with a brief framing related to anarchist and libertarian principles. Then we'll talk a little bit about who Antonio Benaiges was. And then we'll go with the most important part of this symposium, that is the speeches. The first one is going to be Education Grown from Freedom by Henry Readhead. The second one is going to be How to Become the Happiest Teacher in the World and What Celéstin Freinet Has Got to Do with It by Franz Steinberger. And the last one is going to be Experiments in Emancipatory Educational Praxis in and for Social Justice Movements, Contributions and Limitations of Freirean and Feminist Tradition and the Decolonial Challenge by Janet Conway from Canada. So she's going to be in the morning. Well, after that, we're going to have, as I said, the time for questions and discussion around 1 hour, and we are going to finish our session at 7:30 CET at the most. Okay, so thank you everyone for your attendance as well. Thank you the viewers in YouTube. And I think that we are going to give the floor to the speakers to introduce themselves and to dedicate some words to you. So, Henry, if you don't mind to start with the presentations or the introductions.
Yeah, great. Hi, everybody. Lovely to be here, and thank you all very much for coming. My name is Henry Readhead. I am the Deputy Principal of Summerhill School. I am also one of the grandchildren of A.S. Neill. I was a pupil at Summerhill. I then taught music technology at Summerhill, and I'm now the Deputy Principal. So I know far too much about Summerhill. I'm going to be doing a little bit of a talk about the education grown from freedom. And I'm also one of the directors of the A.S. Neill Summerhill CIC as well. So I come at education from many different angles, if you will. That's me.
Okay, thank you, Henry. You know how much I appreciate your collaboration and your friendship. Well, what about you, Franz? Do you want to?
Yeah, hello, good evening. Thank you very much for inviting me. I'm very happy to be here. I'm a pension teacher. I lived in Germany for most of my life. Now I live in Belgium. I'm a trained teacher for special education, especially in the field of blind people and blind children. And I did that for 33 years in Germany, and had a lot of contact, and was also involved in teachers training and in over-regional organizations to create better schools also in Germany. One of the things that I did then in this time was I did a training as a Freinet teacher in the north of Germany. And at this time, at the beginning of this century, I realized that connecting this Freinet approach with connecting the approach to try to introduce people with a handicap in regular school and state school is not only challenging, but also a very rewarding way of approaching education. And that brought me to a way of looking at education in a very, very anarchist and libertarian way, which kept me in my job and made me enjoy it again, made me one of the happy teachers. So I would like to talk a little bit about that, put the Freinet education in a historical background, so it's maybe easier to understand how this all comes out. And hope I find a good way of bringing it over to you. Looking forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Franz. And last but not least, Janet Conway, how are you doing overseas?
Hello there, everybody. My name is Janet Conway. I'm talking to you today from Montreal in Canada. I'm an emeritus professor of sociology from Brock University with a PhD in politics. I am coming with 20 years experience teaching in universities, but more importantly, I think for today's discussion, I have a long history as a social justice activist in different social justice movements. And I'm going to talk about the educational praxis that I and others created in the 1990s, which has really influenced my thinking and my own practice in subsequent activist spaces and also in university spaces. And that's been very influenced by, well, both the context and sources in the Americas, in particular, Paulo Freire, the famous Brazilian popular educator, transnational and anti-racist feminism, and also the phenomenon of indigenous resurgence in the Americas over the last 30 years. So those are some of the big influences in my own thinking and practice that I'm going to talk about today.
Great, thank you. We're looking forward to hearing your speeches. Well, so now we're gonna go for that clarifying about the terms that we are gonna use in this symposium. That is anarchist and libertarian principles of education. So sometimes when we talk about anarchism, everybody goes directly to that things that we are not going to follow. This is chaos, this is disorder, this is the absence of a structure, this is the protest as an end in itself, or just the reactions without construction. So it is nothing about that. So it is very often as well that anarchism is going to be interpreted as the form of anomy, that it's a term that comes from the field of sociology, and it is always referring to social norms collapse, people lack moral or social guidance, or societies that becomes disoriented or fragmented. And we are going to try to follow exactly another completely different brand. This is about responsibility over imposition. This is the freedom as conscious agency, but not license, of course. And this is about ethics and everyday practice. So it's important to understand that, because we have several branches of anarchism, but we should say that maybe those principles are much prior than the terms anarchism or libertarian movements. So we're going to go directly to that idea that I can manage myself because I'm aware that I'm part of a society and a community. So this is not I'm going to do whatever I want, just because this is I'm going to do my best for the community and for society without some coercive or without a very strict guidance by society. Okay, so it is absolutely about those ideas that resonates a lot with the think of different authors like Malatesta, Kropotkin, Reclus, and to name a few. That is, the social organization is stronger when it's based on responsibility, cooperation, and voluntary engagement, and not based on coercion. So that's very important to understand perfectly that concept, because we're not defending anarchism, we are just clarifying the misunderstanding that usually happens. So as you can see here, we are going to present a little bit those main principles, but as I said before, the principles are much prior to the to the terms. So anarchism did not invent these principles, it simply brought them together, and that's why we are really appreciate their work, because the earliest reference we have to these principles date back between 4,000 and 6,000 years ago in China. So we are going to put the focus exactly on the principles instead of different terms or different political conditions, okay? But what are those principles? Well, there are many principles, but we are going to put the focus on some of them. So here you can see that the core principle for us is freedom, not license. So this is the kind of freedom that takes as well responsibility to get the most of ourselves and to get the most for the community at the same time. Okay, so it is a little bit tricky to define those principles just in a few minutes, but it is important to understand the main concept of that. Well, then we have another principles that are going to be always related to freedom and license, and even they're going to be related as well each other. So the first one could be equity. You know, and by far what equity is, but here we want to include as well the responsibility of those people who receive the support of others. So as you know, equity means that we are going to give people what they need, exactly what they need, but at the same time, those people who are granted with this kind of support has the obligation or has the will to get the most of this support. Then we have as well mutual aid and cooperation that is very easy to understand, and this is with the society concept. We need to go all the same direction because we all are on the same boat. So no matter if we have different actions, if we have different characters, if we have different contexts, the society is just one entity that we should preserve. So that's why we are going to work together for the better of all people. Okay. Then we have another one that could be a little bit tricky as well. That is critical consciousness, and sometimes people mistaken that with critical thinking. Well, critical thinking is just one part of critical consciousness. This critical consciousness is the need to go further in the information we have. To go further, to know things in real time, in the real context. So it stems from the humbleness of we don't know absolutely everything. So we need to ask, we need to put in doubt a lot of things to completely understand. But it is as well not just criticizing all the people's other actions. It is actually criticize as well our own actions. You know that every action that we do is going to have a reflection in society. That's why it's very important to be critical with everything, to try to go further, to go to the bottom of the concepts. And then we have self-governance as well, that is very related to democratic principles. So this is the way that we are going to take part in the decisions that are going to affect our future. So it is, of course, a global concept, but in education, it entails something very, very simple. That is, we are going to count on our children to try to put a little bit order in our classrooms. Okay, so those principles in education we can translate like learners as active and responsible agents, not passive, not just hearing people. Teachers as guides, not as controllers, and learning as a shared relational process. And we can add as well very social process. In some, we can say act with awareness of others and the community. And those are the principles that link all the speeches today, and that will link as well the speeches in future years if happened. Well, said that, I have to mention a little bit who Antonio Benaiges was, because as I said, we are going to try to develop this symposium in memory of this teacher. He was a Freinetist teacher and a symbol of emancipatory education, who understood education as a tool for dignity, expression, and social participation. He was born in Catalonia, in Tarragona, in Mont-Roig del Camp, in the northeast part of Spain, but he was a teacher here in a rural school of Bañuelos de Bureba, in a very traditional context. So we can say that this is around 600 kilometers far from his hometown. So it reflects the braveness, the bravery that he had, as to go to a very, very different context to spread his idea about education. So he introduced Freinet pedagogy in a highly traditional context. As I said, it is still very traditional, but of course everything changed. That was especially a very, very conflictive moment in Spain, because it was the year when the Civil War started. Well, he used classroom printing press, of course, as most of the Freinetist teachers. He used as well the free writing, that it was very, very forward-thinking activity in that moment. He tried to use as well the student expression, putting the focus on the emotional part of the child development. So you can see that it could be very, very novel method as well. And he put as well the focus on collective participation for all the students. Well, the education for him was like the voice of the children, the experience and the participation. So it was very, very shocking change in that moment, because the students created their own texts and notebooks, so that they could reflect and they could mull over their lives, their dreams, their environments, and their emotions. So it is something that sometimes we lack right now, nowadays, and he did in that very, very difficult moment. Printing press, as you know, in the classroom, makes learning become active, collaborative, and meaningful. So it is something that in that moment was very useful for those children, and it could be still today something really, really useful. Somehow this is as simple as try to get your students engaged and involved in their own learning process. Well, as I said, that was a very complicated moment in Spain, because education was under constant threat at this moment. We came from the Second Republic, and we went to go into a dictatorship. So he was sadly executed in July 1936, at the beginning of the Spanish Civil War. So right now we are going to be 90 years after his murder. He was targeted partly because of his progressive pedagogy, his democratic values, and his emancipatory educational work. Those things that were well, erased from the Spanish schools for almost 4 decades. So it was absolutely sad, but well, it was what it was. Today, he symbolized that kind of imagination, that kind of educational hope, and that kind of the act of open horizons for the next generation. So I think it is very, very trendy right now. So, and it is very current in those moments. There was a film that you can check if you want, surfing the internet, that was called El Maestro que Prometió el Mar, because he tried to take their children to see the mar, to see the sea, because they had never seen that before. So, and it was a very nice story that maybe you can check. It was always, this film was awarded with some awards, something. So it is, if you decide to watch it, it could be a very, very nice moment for you, despite it's going to be a little bit sad for those who want the best for education, of course. Well, apart from the film, of course, if you have the chance to go over our institution or our province, maybe you can visit the school that was renovated a few years ago. You can go straight to the place through the Asociación Escuela Benaiges. You have here the link if you want to check it. I can share with you the link through the chat as well, just in case somebody is interested in visiting the school. That is pretty nice as well. You will be able to buy some replicas of their books or whatever. So yeah, I highly recommend this visit if you have the chance and you feel something special for education. Well, said that, I just have to thank you for your attention and to thank as well our speakers for accepting our invitation. And now it's time for them to start their presentation. So thank you very much for your attention, and let's keep going with the next step of this symposium. Henry, I think this is your time.
Yeah, okay. Great. Thank you very much for that, Miguel. Thank you very, very much. Okay, so yeah, so I want to I'm going to talk about Summerhill School. But actually, to be honest with you, the main part of Summerhill that I want to talk about is the kind of the founding ethos, really. Summerhill School was started in 1921 by my grandfather, A.S. Neill. Just for the few people maybe who don't have some basic information, we are a live-in community. It's a residential community. We do have some day pupils. We have children from all over the world. It's a self-governing community, a democratic community. We have children from the age of 5 all the way up to 18. And we offer the national qualifications, but the school was founded fundamentally on freedom. A.S. Neill called Summerhill in the very earliest stages, and all the way through, he called it a free school. Unfortunately, the Department for Education in the UK has just stolen and abused, should I say, the term free school. So we're not using it anymore. But he used to call it a free school. And I feel that what I would like to do is kind of talk a little bit about those sort of founding principles to a certain extent, fundamentally talking about freedom first of all. But what I'd like to do, I want to read you a quote. I hope this is going to work for everybody. I haven't got it to share the screen because I prefer to just have it to have me on the screen. Just quickly, I will just mention, just in case if this is useful for anybody, if you go down the bottom of your screen, there's a transcript where there's an ongoing sort of written transcript of what we're saying. If you find that helpful, if your English is maybe not quite so good, and you find that helpful, just to say that that's available for you. Okay, let me just read you this quote. This is a quote of A.S. Neill's. He said, "We set out to make a school in which we should allow children freedom to be themselves. In order to do this, we had to renounce all discipline, all direction, all suggestion, all moral training, all religious instruction. We have been called brave, but it did not require courage. All it required was what we had, a complete belief in the child as a good, not an evil being. Since 1921, this belief in the goodness of the child has never wavered. It rather has become a final faith." Now, when talking about the word freedom, there's quite a few angles. Lots of different people have different kind of relational connections to the word freedom. So before I go any further with it, I want to just talk a little bit about that word straight away, in reflection to that lovely quote, freedom from. You know, one of the main things that happens at Summerhill, and when we're talking about the ethos of Summerhill, is to remove all of those things. And the reason why is, and I really love the way he put it in this quote, is a belief in the child as a good, not a evil, not a bad. We don't have to work to train the child or to mold the child to become good. The point being is you have to give them freedom and allow them to be, and that is enough in the fact that we can trust in them and that they, you know, as a foundation sort of thing. So I kind of wanted to just plant that lovely quote at the beginning there. Another quote that he had, which sort of interlinks really, is the bestowal of freedom is the bestowal of love, and only love can change the world. Well, I'm sure we're all pretty much in a situation where we're feeling that the world needs quite a lot of love at the moment, and there's a few people out there who are not quite doing this, but there's something really important in that. First of all, the giving of freedom. When you're giving freedom to a child, you're also giving trust. And in fact, you almost can't actually give freedom sincerely without giving them sincere trust, without trusting in them as a child. It relates as a child, sorry, as a being, as a person. It relates to that other quote. You know, we're trusting in the fact that the child is going to be okay. We all know that children going through childhood, they're designed to push boundaries. They're designed to learn about the world. Fundamentally, they're good people, and the trust, it's a really important part of what we're giving when we're giving freedom. We're showing that child that we trust them. The next part of that is you can't give trust without giving approval, without showing the child sincerely, by giving them freedom, by showing them that we trust them. We're showing them that we approve of them regardless of anything. We love them unconditionally. This is another very powerful notion of what happens at Summerhill. It's a very important thing, a very, very important thing as an underlying thing, that we approve of them for whatever they do. If it is that a child breaks a law, if a child upsets someone else, okay, we've got systems in place at the school, we've got the meeting process, the self-governance, where we can solve problems. But regardless of what the child does, we approve of them and we trust them and we give them freedom, and so we love them. Unconditional love and approval and acceptance. And then the other part of that is acceptance. You can't give approval without showing that you also accept them for who they are as an individual, as a welcome, as a you know, by doing that, it's a celebration of the individuality by all of those lovely things. I quite like to kind of just share those sort of things, really, because I feel it's a really nice way to kind of be thinking about it. The trust that we give is the freedom that we give, is the love that we give, is the approval that we give, and is the acceptance that we give. All of those things are all very, very nicely linked. So this kind of leads now onto the ethos of Summerhill. Fundamentally, the ethos of Summerhill School is freedom, not license. I'm going to just talk about freedom, not license in a few different kind of contexts. Fundamentally, we're talking about freedom with responsibility. We're talking about, and there's four different areas to this that I want to talk about. The first one is to yourself. Now, we all have individual freedom. We all give ourselves individual freedom, but we also have to take responsibility for ourselves. We have to take care of ourselves. We are also, there's a role in that. And even within when working with children, that's an important part of what's actually happening when we're all living as a community together. We're giving freedom, but at the same time, we're trusting them. So children, they have the freedom, but they also have responsibility for themselves as well. And that part is also really important. The next part of that is responsibility to other people. So freedom, not license, works with other people. I'm free to do what I want, but it's not okay for me to upset someone else. It's not okay for me to play my drum kit in the middle of the night and wake people up. It's you know, that just simple situation of the fact that I do have freedom and I have absolute freedom, but I have a responsibility to other people. I can't upset other people. That's not okay. I can't infringe my freedom upon other people. Same vice versa. So you have it in sort of simple situations like that as well. The next part that we find is important is freedom, not license, directly feeds the community. Summerhill School, almost the word school at the end there can almost be changed for the word community. Summerhill fundamentally, actually, at the forefront, at the front, it's actually a community. We are all, I'm saying we're all, the teachers, the adults, the kids, the children, everybody is all part of that community. We all have that community takes care of us. It gives us freedom. It supports us. It puts all these lovely things in place to help us and to give us benefit. But at the same time, it needs to run. It needs responsibility. It needs to be fed for it to be able to keep going. To function as a community takes input. So the freedom not license, the freedom with responsibility works from ourselves to community as well. It's another kind of nice way, an important angle to look at it. The final part really to with freedom not license is the choice that we have to do. And so, but we also then have to take responsibilities for the choices we make. I will use an example. You know, if we're at Summerhill, you don't have to go to lessons, as I'm sure most people know. If a child wants to go have a specific goal when they leave the school, if they want to go to university, if they want to go, if there's something specifically they want to become a doctor, a surgeon, a lawyer, whatever those things are, they need to be given informed decisions to be able to make the freedom to make informed decisions. So we're there to supply lots of lovely information for them and to help them along the journey and to support them with those decisions. But fundamentally, we want to create an environment where the children are taking responsibility for the decisions they're making. And, you know, if they want to go to lessons, they've got the freedom. Well, they're going to have to go to lessons and actually do the work. It comes with it. You have the freedom of choice, but the reality is you have responsibility with that as well. So these sort of four angles, if you will, of freedom not license, they're quite nice ways to look at it. They're quite nice sort of additional sort of angles, really, to look at the ethos. And really, you know, Summerhill has grown from this. I'd like to sort of talk about this almost as if the seed, if you will, quite a nice way to sort of think about how the Summerhill community runs and has continued to run for 100 years. So the next part of this, there's a few different things I want to go on to. First of all, I want to talk a little bit about relationship. Fundamentally, when you talk about freedom not license, fundamentally you're talking about relationship. And this is, it's kind of almost I say almost a bit of a new angle. Summerhill, we've been looking at the idea of Summerhill being a little bit more relationship-centered education. And it's something that you know, an interesting sort of thing to be sharing, really, because relationship is absolutely at the heart of every single thing that happens within the school, and it's a powerful, powerful thing. When you look back at what I said of the freedom, the trust, the approval, the acceptance, the, you know, unconditional love, you're talking about really healthy, good quality, healthy relationship when you're talking about those fundamental things. And freedom not license, fundamentally, again, that's what you're talking about. You're talking about relationship. So like I said, those four different angles that I mentioned, you've got relationship to yourself, you've got relationship to others, you've got relationship to community, and you have relationship to what it is that you do and the reasons why you do them and the decisions that you make. So yeah, I want to just sort of bring those bits and pieces, really, just to share, really. So the next part of it what you'll kind of notice through this as well is talking about equality. You see, equality comes very naturally. You don't really have to push for equality when you're living under these principles, with this idea of freedom, not license. Equality, it happens very naturally through with the sort of the foundation of freedom, not license. You're talking about equality straight away. You're talking about equal rights. You're talking about the thing that we should celebrate us all as individuals, and we should accept everybody for who they are. And that kind of that the celebration of individuality, but also that lovely connection of equality that comes from that is very powerful. It's very important. The equality happens throughout the school all the way through, and I'll explain a little bit more when I get to the sort of the element of sort of self-governance, a little bit more of how that kind of works. But what we're talking about is we're talking about the rights. We're talking about all of us as individuals within the community have equal rights. We're all there to you know, we can all make decisions about the day-to-day life of the community, where we can all take part in all sorts of different ways. Yes, of course, adults have some very specific roles that they take on, and responsibilities that they take on. Of course, it's a school from that perspective, of course. But when it comes to the decision making, you know, that's a given straight away. We're all equal in that process. We're all equal in that process. So now A.S. Neill, another little quote of A.S. Neill's. He said that you can't give freedom without giving the opportunity for the children to self-govern their social life. This is another nice kind of idea, another nice angle. When you're sort of looking at the foundations of the school, obviously the democracy, the self-governance, the way we run our community from that, the way we make decisions, the way our community is formed, and the safeguarding, if you will, of the school community happens is through the meetings process. I mean, it's absolutely core. It's kind of the first element, if you will, of practice, or system that was put into the school. The first sort of structural system, if you will, to absolutely support all of those beautiful things that I've just talked about. And they're absolutely, it's all essential that all of those values, all of those things that I've just spoken about are all live. You've got to make sure that whenever sort of talking about education, often I sort of help people start up schools and bits and pieces. One of the most valuable things that you can be doing is to be making sure that whatever systems you put in place, they allow for those beautiful freedoms and those beautiful things that I talked about earlier to be in place, to flourish, to be the focus of the school. And yeah, when thinking about the democratic sort of process at Summerhill, it's an essential part. So in simple form, we have a couple of meetings per week. They last for roughly about an hour. We make all of our day-to-day life decisions of how the school is going to be run. Within the meetings, we also do conflict resolution within the meetings. There's other ways of doing conflict resolution as well. I won't go into too much detail about that. Ways that the kids can do it amongst themselves, and all sorts of bits and pieces, but things can be brought to the meeting to be discussed and resolved in the meeting as well. Everybody has an equal vote, obviously. Everyone has the right to be heard, and that's just a given. That's the undercurrent. When a 5 or 6 year old child, 7-year-old child comes to Summerhill School, when a child first arrives in Summerhill School, it's not a message that we need to tell them that they have equal rights and that they're living in a community where their voice is accepted and their voice is approved of. We do it through action instantly. it's just and it's a very beautiful element of it, I'll have to say as well. Watching a child come to the school and suddenly have, it's almost the jackets of weight that might have come from societal expectation, or might have come from education, their previous education system, or might even come from parenting situations that might be putting pressure or expectations upon the child. There's this real sense of alleviation just when they come to the school. And it's, as I said, it's not through what we tell them. It's literally through the way that the school is run and what the school does. So that, I guess another way of coming of it is going back to that lovely celebration of individuality. That lovely acceptance, coming back to the last part of acceptance for who they are. As a foundation stone, without anything at all, the school itself does exactly that, and it's a very powerful and very beautiful thing. And we see on a day-to-day basis, you'll see a small child bringing something up, bringing up a case against an older child that might have harassed them, someone who rode their bike, someone who broke a law, maybe someone who, you know, whatever happened, maybe even a staff member who was late to a lesson. Quite often, I won't say quite often, but I've had that a few times. Situations where actually children feel that they can actually bring up and actually exercising their rights, actually using it. Yeah, it's a very powerful and beautiful thing. Okay, so I'll just do a little bit more. I'm just going to go back a little bit to the freedom. A very beautiful thing that the freedom allows for is for children to be intrinsic, for children to fulfill, to start to move into their own developmental pace, to start listening to their own intrinsic needs, start to fulfill their needs fundamentally. And it's a very powerful thing. Fundamentally, this is done through free play. I mean, we literally at Summerhill School, we have never ever looked at a child and said, okay, this child has actually now had too much free play. There's actually no such thing as too much free play. Children, when given beautiful freedom and allow for all of those lovely things, they will play and they'll play and they'll play and they'll play. And when they feel ready, they will naturally move into those lovely next stages. That's about interests. My grandfather talked about it as being kind of moving from the movement from free play into work, almost starting to think about that next stage, that the next sort of maturity, almost of that next stage in their lives, those next steps to a certain extent. But fundamentally, it's through interest, and those lovely intrinsic interests, those intrinsic needs are fuel interest, and then given that lovely freedom, then children very naturally do that. So that kind of just painting, I'm just going to sprinkle it because I'm not talking, I didn't want to talk a whole lot about Summerhill School as a practice, as a place, but that does directly lead to the non-compulsory to lessons, making sure we have lovely, beautiful, and very enthusiastic teachers, very passionate, very skilled teachers, and lots of lovely opportunity for the children at the school, but for them to have that complete non-judgment, not feeling guilty at all, just literally absolute freedom to join those lessons if and when they want to. And that non-compulsion is essential. So it goes all the way up to the GCSE. We offer qualification. Children take their GCSEs. They go on to further education. Most of them go on to university and bits and pieces like that. They will follow their own journeys. And we want to make sure we offer a very high quality education. But fundamentally, the most important part of that is that they have the choice of whether they go to those lessons on a daily basis. Even the exam, they don't have to go to. We never, ever force a child to do anything. And that's an essential part of it. So the last little element of that, so that I just want to sort of paint that picture really of that, going back to the intrinsic, that beautiful journey that the child goes through, where they're absolutely locked into their own childhood. They are the ones in charge of it. They've got the freedom. They're trusted. They're making all the decisions that they want to be doing. They're fulfilling their needs. And the school is perfectly formed. I'm going to say perfectly formed. I would like to say so anyway. Is perfectly formed to support that. As I went back to the beginning, you know, if you're starting a school and you want to implement these values, you want to implement these things into you've got to try not to be stepping on the toes. There's no point in saying you've got freedom, but if you don't learn how to read and write by the age of 8 years old, then you're going to be in trouble. Well, you're not really giving the trust and the approval in that situation. So you've got to be, you know, when doing this, and I think that this is something that A.S. Neill specifically thought very strongly from the beginning. You know, he wanted to form, he wanted to focus on the child, he wanted the social emotional development, that all of that stuff must come first. You know, the lovely meeting process, the living as a community, all of that stuff is just by far the most valuable thing. Yeah, and then so he created a lovely education system around that. I say he created, I will sort of mention, Summerhill has evolved. The system of Summerhill, the school part of Summerhill has evolved, but it's evolved through the children and the community. I will add us staff as well, because we're an important part of it, of course. But fundamentally, the children being free to connect to the world around them and to change their world around them to accommodate the way they are developing and the way that what they're interested in. And this is obviously, I could go a lot into screens. You know, you think about the digital era coming in. We're now entering the AI era. All of these things, children naturally are playing with it. They're touching base with it. You need to allow for those lovely freedoms to things like that to happen, but to allow systems where they can go, okay, we think actually that is too much. We think we shouldn't allow this. We should allow this. This was okay. This wasn't okay. Let's try this. And very naturally, when you create a system, you know, a school like Summerhill, it evolves continuously. Okay, so last little bit, I think, I just want to say really, which I just haven't mentioned, the word sincerity. Sincerity is a very important part of what we do at the school as well. Being emotionally free, feelers rather than thinkers is what A.S. Neill is another term that A.S. Neill used. Really, really important that children are directly connected to their emotions, very free with their emotions as well. It's another thing that the freedom gives, which is also very, very powerful and very beautiful, and also the trust and approval, all of those things. Allowing for emotional expression, allowing for people to be real, genuinely real with emotions. And so, yeah, so that sincerity is another part of it. It also feeds, obviously, into very beautiful, healthy relationships. You can't really have a beautiful and a very, very healthy relationship if you're not sincere, if you're not being yourself and you're not externally being yourself and being true to yourself. A very, very powerful part. Okay, I won't take any more of your time. We have two other lovely, lovely speakers, so I won't take any more of your time. I hope it has been interesting for you. I'm looking forward to some discussion. And I'm looking forward to, obviously, I'm sure there's, you know, there'll be more of these symposiums as well. It's a really lovely topic, and so hopefully there'll be lots of lovely opportunity to meet with you all, and that sort of thing. So thank you all very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Henry. So just a little reminder about the questions. You can ask all your questions through the chat. Just send in the organizers your questions. Well, as I said, Henry, freedom of license is very complicated to explain in just a few minutes because you have to touch a lot of points. And
there's a lot of points in there, and trust me, I could go a lot longer as well. But hopefully that's given a bit of a foundation anyway. Hopefully that's given a little bit of something. to come from.
Great. All people have in the chat as well the website of your website, just in case they want to check your work and your principles and your work in the CIC. Okay.
I love it. Thank you very much. Thank
perfect.
you. Thank you. Okay.
Okay, so we're gonna go with Franz. So the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. That was lovely, Henry. I was really diving into the idea of coming to your school. That would be really nice. And being a pupil again, that would be lovely. I'm going to talk about Celéstin Freinet, and I would like to do it in a little bit different way than Henry just did, but you will notice, and Henry and I noticed ourselves 4 years ago when we met personally, that a lot of the threads that Henry brought up, I'm going to pick up in my talk too, and it will make it probably easier for you to understand, because I would like to put Freinet into the bracket of history, into a bracket of a certain extent of theory, because I'm a really good friend of understanding where somebody comes from, understanding why somebody does something, and also in the end understanding, which I think is very important, and Miguel said that at the beginning, why this kind of education hasn't completely spread all over the whole society, over all the schools, because we are very convinced that this is the way we should be going, and still there are other tendencies in history. If my English is a little bit difficult, I want to excuse, because I lived in Germany most of my life, I told you. Now I'm living in Belgium. They are speaking Dutch here, French, some German, and a lot of English, Spanish, Japanese, whatever. I'm not trying to learn Dutch, but I realize that the more from my German I'm trying to learn Dutch, I forget my English. But that's the way it is. So I hope you can understand everything what I say. I would like to start with giving a short insight into the background of the era of this new education movement in the beginning of the last, or in the first fifth of the last century. If you look at the world at the beginning of the 20th century, it was largely dominated by a feudal system, and this feudal system was dominated all over the whole world by European states. The world and its humanity developed all over 10,000 of years, but it was in Europe that the density of the population was highest, and the industrialization took its way to spread all over the world. With these new markets and new resources that were needed for this, and Europe took its belief in its lead as a justification to take other parts of the world under its power, the so-called colonization and industrialization of the world. Even though the world was full of habitats, societies, and cultures already which were capable of surviving without European influence. Very often, and I had this experience when I was in Canada. I was at Lake Louise in the Rocky Mountains, and I saw a sign which said the settler so-and-so in the year so-and-so discovered this beautiful Lake Louise with the help of the Indian trapper so-and-so. And I was thinking, well, the word discover is absolutely wrong in this point. And then I realized that beside it, there was a sign to say exactly that. The trapper didn't discover the lake because the Indians or the natives, the Indian is the wrong name, the natives have lived there for 10,000 of years, and it's just the Europeans who came there at one point in civilization. That's the attitude that the Europeans brought in. And then there were many, many wars in the centuries which were undertaken because of the belief of European supremacy and the misuse of power and religion through the centuries. And the development for today's standards culminated then in I could tell you a lot more about this, but I have to make it short because it doesn't make sense in this seminar here. But it culminated in the First World War with its very high death toll in certain parts of Europe and a lot of unhappiness and destruction, especially in France, in parts of France, in Belgium, and in Germany. I won't go further into this detail, but it makes understandable where this movement came from, because it is important to state that at that time, the feudal system in large parts of Europe had reached its limits, and people had realized at the latest after the revolutions in France and Germany that they have no choice, and they have a choice, and a life can be different and more rewarding than following any dictator or king or a Kaiser and taking his word as a religion. This was a very important basic for changes possible. After these hundreds of years of suppression and disaster, and also hundreds of years of development of philosophy, economy, and politics, especially here in the mid of Europe and in Russia, social movements led to the evolvement of communism and socialism, with which strongly implemented the individual not as a tool for the mighty, but as a gear wheel in the rumbling and steaming machinery of society, which keeps it running but also has the power to stop it on the spot. Meaning it gave people a feeling of worth and strength. On the other hand, the school system was doing the exact opposite still then, stuffing children into rooms and houses with mostly inhumane conditions, forcing them to be there under the cover of protecting them to being sent to labor. The unrestricted possibilities to use power and violence by mostly male teachers. The reduction of curricula to what the establishment thought right and be best for the forthcome of industrial society. In short, school was an effigy to the feudal system and kept its position even after its downfall. Why do I mention all this? I told you there was growing unhappiness, and this growing time of chaos and to a certain extent anarchy in big parts of Europe. The Austrian Empire collided, the German Empire collided, the Russian Empire collided, and those were huge empires in that time. They made it possible for new movements, new ideas to come in. And that was the years of 1918 plus. And this is where the New Era movement came up. And because they understood, the people of this New Era movement in Europe understood that if they did not want to allow society to fall back into the endless times of wars and destruction, and you want to form society which is not dependent on some few persons in power, you need to hook on education and bring in changes in the school system, which enables humans to understand their own freedom of choice and their chance of intellectual growth to be able to contribute and not just function in the societies of the beginning of the 20th century. Now, on this background, maybe you can better understand that there was not only, like in Germany or in some parts of other parts of Europe, there was always the danger of flashback, but there was also the chance of bringing up something very unique, which hadn't been there in all the centuries before. This New Era movement came out of the Theosophical Society, and the outcomes and the books and the stories of quite some philosophers, psychologists, educationalists, and other visionaries who developed and wrote about and largely established a new approach to child rearing, of which A.S. Neill and Celéstin Freinet were part of. In the 20s, especially in the tradition of Johann Heinrich Pestalozzi in Switzerland, Jean-Jacques Rousseau in France, Friedrich Fröbel in Germany, Johann Friedrich Herbert in Germany, John Dewey in the United States, Rudolf Steiner in Germany, Maria Montessori in Italy, Janusz Korczak in Poland, and just to name some of the most common names in the long list of the influential people who founded schools, movements, societies, of which lots of them still exist today. This new era fellowship developed principles that were capable of changing the school system to a very positive way, and a lot of the things that Henry just talked about in his speech that are established at Summerhill School and have survived in Summerhill School, luckily enough, also were able to survive in the school of Celéstin Freinet, which I will come to in a moment. That shows that these principles are also very basic principles that everybody can agree upon. The question is, why is it so difficult to establish them on the long term? But if you think about what I told you about history, then you have a notion of what it means to bring in new ideas in society that turn over basic thinking, that turn over long established thinking in society and bring new things in. And at the end of my speech, I would like to come back to this thought, because still today, as a pension teacher, I still think a lot about what is possible in society. What can we do? Sorry. What can we do to establish more of this education, as Miguel also said at the beginning, especially in the times that we are living in right now. The New Era Education Fellowship accompanied this educational outbreak at the beginning of the last century. And it is an organization which came out of the new education movement and is still existing today and is still functioning today. They put up 10 essential basic positions, which I would like to read to you and explain every single one, because I think they are very essential and very important. The first basic position that new education should support is understanding children and young people and thinking from their perspective, which means just fetching them from where they are, where they come from, who they are, and linking to their experience and knowledge. The second basic position is realizing a changed teacher-pupil relationship. That is demolishing the statue of the untouchable and undiscussable teacher in favor of partnership and cooperation. You will hear a lot of the things that Henry mentioned in the words that I'm saying right now. The third thing is promoting independence and self-directed learning. That means taking wishes of children seriously and enhancing their trial and error learning. The fourth principle is teaching and learning holistically. Thinking the world as a whole and everything being connected for better understanding. That's the reason why I took this bracket of history to explain where Freinet comes from. Number 5, creating diverse and learner-centered environments. That means giving room for everyone and not forcing learners in spaces that they do not connect with. Very, very important principle in Summerhill. Number 6 is implementing a real-world focus in the curriculum, meaning opening the classroom from being a workshop to being a training ground for the outside world. And seventh is prioritizing community over competition, meaning getting away from judging and comparing. Number 8 is overcoming exclusion. That means including every individual, no matter which personal and physical condition the individual is in. Very important nowadays. Number 9, one before last, developing a culture of living and working. Meaning moving school away of being a training ground that is cast off everyday life. And the 10th and last, taking interdisciplinarity and internationality into account, That means not teaching topics or subjects, but creating the happiest happenings at school, at real life, and connecting everything that it needs to achieve goals. One good example for that, which I quite often took to explain mathematics in school, is, and Henry has a lot of examples that he could tell about that in Summerhill too. If you want to teach children to learn all the topics that we learned are important at school, you might as well go shopping with them, which means mathematics from the beginning to the end, organization, finding your way on the grounds on the way to school, organizing yourself in what you need to do, financial organization and everything. If you just think of it, which basics you need to be able to go shopping for your family, then you have the school in whole, and that's something that children really need in life, and not how to calculate, how to sum up, or how to write words. Celéstin Freinet understood all of this, and he established his kind of education in France. He was a teacher who was born in the south of France, in the Provence, just before the turn of the century, from the 19th to the 20th century. Ironical, or maybe significantly, just like Neill, he called his school time traumatic. He was forced in the French army in the big war and was badly injured, which was a key experience which turned him into a pacifist, laicist, and communist. Later on, after the Second World War, he left the Communist Party because that was too much ideology for him. But it's very essential for his way of thinking that you see which political part of the world he came from. France was not occupied in World War I, but still was strongly influenced by the French Revolution and the void that occurred in that time, and which opened the world for new ideas and approaches. Freinet also understood that a different educational system was needed to be able to tackle the problems that arose in society at that time. He founded the École Moderne, which still exists in Vence, almost on the south coast in the mountains above Cannes and Nice. The Second World War caused problems again, but you can say to an extent that he was lucky that the south of France stayed unoccupied by the German army, but still under the influence of the invading German army. So he was imprisoned, but survived and refounded the school as it still exists today. His principles that I studied as a Freinet teacher, and which I thought were very which could very well explain what he wanted, and which didn't put his education in brackets or didn't put it into an ideology as a concept. As you look at Montessori or you look at Steiner, you see very often there are ideological brackets that you put in and certain things that you have to do to achieve something specific. Freinet was there very different. He put his, he experimented a lot in school, and he put his education basically just on 6 very essential columns. The 6 columns were free expression, democracy, the natural method, leaving the training rooms, heterogeneity, and sharing achievements. I would like to explain all these a little bit more. Free expression, maybe I have to go a step further back. What drove Freinet to do what he does, what he did, was he just realized that when a child gets born, he or she, the child, just is thrown into the world. You could say, to a certain extent, against its will, but others say different. Anyway, the child is thrown into this world out of mother's bosom, and nature kind of expects it to function. It does, because it has its senses and its genes, and it knows what to do. The mother knows what to do normally, and then the child kind of just accompanies the grown-ups in their life. It takes a while before the child opens its eyes. It takes a while before the child learns to use its senses. But what is very important is that the child at this stage of life only learns by watching and copying the grown-ups. That's the essential of learning. And by doing this, it learns everything that it does, everything that it needs at this stage of life. Freinet always used some very specific, in connection with Freinet. You don't know if it's really a quote of original quote of Freinet, but they always use this expression that eagles don't walk up steps, which means that an eagle learns how to fly because it has wings. So there's no necessity for an eagle to walk up steps. A child watches grown-ups walking, and it realizes that moving from one point to the other makes a lot of sense. It's because it's curious too. So what does it do? It tries to find out what is happening while it is learning to walk. And in the end, it comes down to everything what the child does is practicing and learning from practicing, learning speech, learning language, learning everything. So why in the world would you, when a child comes to school, tell the child that if you can read a book, that's not the topic today, that's going to happen the next year? Why should you why should you have the idea of stopping the child in its tracks of learning? This is the point where the child must feel as if a bulldozer ran it over, and it's just crushed in its will and its idea of approaching the world. And that's what Freinet very precisely understood and picked up on, and said, we have to just take the child from where it is and expose and support and enhance its free expression, because that is very important for the child to find its own personality. That's the one column. The second column, which is very, very important, is democracy. I remember in my school time in the state schools, very often we talked about democracy, and we talked about implementing more parts of democracy and more democracy in school. But then again, whenever it came to it and whenever we practiced it, it kind of died out very easily. And the reason is, in a very undemocratic school system, where the teachers in the state school system practically don't have any influence on anything, how can you teach democracy there if you as a teacher are not in a democratic system yourself? That doesn't make sense. So in the Freinet schools, every morning they would meet and they would discuss what they would be doing during the day. And everybody would bring in his ideas, and everybody would decide what he was going to do during the day, or either do his own thing or join somebody else in doing something. And the free speech, just like Henry said about Summerhill, is a very essential part of Freinet education. And for me, in this way, the only way to learn what democracy really is about. Then the third column is the natural method, which means that a teacher, if he realizes that a child needs an explanation, the teacher needs, if the child needs an explanation, you don't go about and give him a speech or give him a book. You would try to accompany the child in its way of discovering. For example, if you look at the leaves of all the different plants outside, I'm very lucky here in Bruges to have a wonderful park in front of my house. And if I look around, I see, I don't know how many different kinds of leaves. And every kind of this leaf, every leaf in itself has a certain symmetry in its system. So if you want to explain symmetry, you needn't take a piece of paper or a drawing, just go outside and show the children leaves. Show how plants grow. Show that there are no rectangles in the nature. The only rectangles you find in nature are in crystals. And things like that. That's the natural method. It implements something very, very basic, that the child just simply discovers the world as it is and deducts all that it needs from what it experiences in the world, which I think is a very beautiful approach to learning. Then the fourth column is leaving the training rooms, which to me makes more sense than a lot of other things, which just means, why would you like to explain the world or show the children the world in a training room, in a school classroom, instead of going out and showing them and experiencing it with them? So going on a trip, discovering, I don't know, rowing on a river or riding a horse, or I don't know, how to build a wall, is much more rewarding and helps the child a lot more than theoretically explaining how to put one stone on the other and in a way that the wall doesn't collapse. Just do it. The fifth is heterogeneity. And I think I can leave that out because Janet is going to tell us a lot about that in the next speech. Just in short, heterogeneity is just simply a natural outcome of this approach in education, because it doesn't really matter what kind of the child is in front of you. It is a child and it wants to learn and it wants to accompany you in the world. And it doesn't matter what kind of child you have in front of you. It's a child and it's there to learn. And the sixth thing, which is also a very basic column, is sharing achievements. I at first had some problems with that because that can easily go into judging, but it makes sense to share your discoveries with other people. And it trains you to do that in your professional life and in life in general, which is, when it comes to it, a lot of fun. So in Freinet then achieved or introduced his printing method in his schools, that all the achievements that children had, they learned to explain in words, they learned to describe, they learned to use the language and use the techniques that they discovered to explain their learning progress to other people in their world. And that is something that is a good training to not be too self-confident, but to develop a very natural self-confidence. So if you want to break down Freinet education to a concept, you are taking on a difficult task. And the reason is, if you want to open your education for the individual, how do you put that in a curriculum? There's no way, because every individual is different. So here's the major breaking point in Freinet education. I explained that this way of approaching, he just deducted from the way children learn before school and brought this idea into school and said, why should we stop doing that? School has to be the same way as children would like to learn. So he changed the perspective of the teacher completely from being the knowing one who wants to explain the world to a companion who listens and learns from the other, to them with his experience and wisdom, to the person with experience and wisdom who offers support and encouragement in a partnership with a child. And at the same time, he creates learning conditions and places in favor of the learner. And so you can say, to put it in a shortened sentence, he becomes, from a freedom taker, you become a freedom giver. So this is one of the major things where Summerhill and Freinet education are very alike. The major outcome for me personally, doing this as a practicing Freinet teacher, was a tremendous gain in joy and motivation in my profession as a teacher. It frees you of tremendous societal weight. And because as you approach the learning situation, you are free of judgment, no thinking of predicaments. You open up to the learner as a personality and are full of question marks, and you realize that not only your companion is a learner, but you yourself are also a learner. And that's the big fun of it. It's lifelong learning. So when I was writing this speech, I finished with a short episode, because when I was writing my speech and when I was adding all the things that I would like to say and putting them into making up a word line, I came over this book which was sitting on my desk, and it is a book which was written about something that happened very near here in Belgium in World War I, which I have talked about a lot. And so I kind of come back to the beginning. I show you this book. This book is called You Not Shoot, We Not Shoot. And maybe some of you know it. This is about something that happened in the First World War in a forest very near here, in the forest of Ploegstert, on the border to France. And it happened in 1914, just a few months after the beginning of the First World War, where big, huge armies of millions of soldiers were sent into a senseless killing, that in the trenches, French and German soldiers were sitting and waiting for the next battle on Christmas Eve in 1914, when an English soldier suddenly heard Christmas carols in the German trench. And he called out and said, "What's happening?" And then they said, "You not shoot, we not shoot." And then the German soldier and the French soldier walked out of the trench and met in the middle of the battleground and smoked a cigarette together. And in the end, there was a truce, an unofficial truce of 3 days during the Christmas time, that the French and German soldiers, and it's a true story that is told everywhere, and there's a monument in this place about this, that in the midst of the First World War, the soldiers came out of the trenches, and for 3 days, not one shot was fired, but they played a game of football and enjoyed themselves, and they exchanged Christmas trees, and they even exchanged presents as it was possible at that time. And that shows that humans can be very different, and humans, as they are allowed to do what they are allowed to do, they would make this world a much better place. So let me end with these words, and I'm happy to join in the discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Franz, for your speech. Well, as you can see, sometimes we are looking for magic tricks in education. We know, we all know that it's mostly impossible, but it is true that Freinet usually suggests, it's very good suggesting pretty concise activity that could be developed in the classroom. So thank you very much for your recommendations and how you look over all the principles. Thank you. Okay, so
My pleasure.
now we have time for Janet, so the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. It's a real honor to be invited into this conversation, and I'm really glad to be here and looking forward to the discussion. I'm struck in listening to Henry and Franz how convergent really the traditions that we are coming from, even though they are quite also distinct. I'm going to speak a little bit about some distinct traditions that have informed my practice over the years. So in the time that I have, just let me outline what I hope to cover. I just want to start by specifying the context of my experience and these remarks, and talk about a specific educational praxis in a social movement in the 1990s in Toronto, in a network of organizations called the Metro Network for Social Justice, in which we developed an educational praxis for social movement building that was informed by the work of Brazilian popular educator Paulo Freire. And I'll talk a little bit about Freire for those of you who don't know who he was or are not familiar with his thinking. In the course of that educational practice, I'll tell you a little bit about that and give you some examples, but very quickly, we were confronted by the limitations of Freire's thought, especially as we were confronted by racialized difference in the context of the world city of Toronto. And we found, we in that network, but also I, as I continued to think and write about these problems, found resources to think about educational practice, but also political practice of coalition building across difference in feminist thought and politics. So I want to talk a little bit about anti-racist and transnational feminism and what they can contribute to our thinking and practice. And finally, to consider how also that tradition of thinking has been confronted by the challenge of Indigenous movements in Canada, in North America, and indeed around the world, that are pushing emancipatory traditions like feminism beyond itself. And so I want to talk a little bit about that and just end my talk by talking about how this experience in social movement education has translated into a university context and teaching social justice studies. So to start with my context, to say, first of all, a little bit different from the other speakers in that my major reference point has been outside of formal educational settings. It's been in social movement settings. Secondly, that my context in the Americas, I think, is also different in that Freire is an educator based in Brazil and emerged in the context of the dictatorship in Brazil. And also anti-racist and transnational feminism really flowered in North America as a North American movement and in the North American Academy. And finally, that also Indigenous movements are on the rise, have been on the rise, and are very powerful politically in Canada and in North America. So these are some distinct contributions from the context in the Americas that makes my thinking a little bit different from the others. Thirdly, I would say that my experience has been in teaching adults, not teaching children. And I think that's really different, and that could be something interesting to talk about in the discussion. Most of what I will talk about has been a practice situated in or around Toronto. And I think this is significant to say in that Toronto is considered a world city. It's a large city, 5 million people in the Greater Toronto area. It's a city that has been at the forefront of globalizing processes in Canada. It's a center of finance. It's been a center of neoliberal economic restructuring, of cuts to the welfare state at all levels. It's also an intensely multicultural and multiracial, multilingual, multi-religious city. It's a city of immigration, and it's also a city of protest and social movement activity. So a big urban world city like Toronto has been the setting for the kind of educational practice I'll talk about. In the universities where I've taught in and around Toronto, the students have mostly been working class students. They've been first generation in their families to attend university. And my experience in teaching universities has been basically in social science classrooms, so in interdisciplinary social science and social justice studies. And as I mentioned, this has also been a period of time since the 1990s when Indigenous movements have been on the rise, and Indigenous sovereignty is on political and educational agendas also, and have posed really significant, I think, challenges to even to the emancipatory traditions in educational thinking and practice. Finally, globally, this has also been, for me, in terms of my activist practice and also my intellectual work, 20 years of working in internationalized spaces of social justice movements, particularly at the World Social Forum and in transnational feminist networks like the World March of Women. And these are spaces of intense encounters across difference, all kinds of difference, internationalized difference, but also differences across race, class, culture, language, religion, and so on. And they've been spaces where movements have sought to build coalition and build convergence across difference. And the reason why I talk about that here is that these processes in social movements, which are cultural political processes, are also pedagogical processes. They are unavoidably communicative and processes of learning of individuals and of communities and of movements. Okay, so that's a little bit about sort of the specificity of the context of my thinking and practice and the context of my remarks today. I want to tell you a little bit about the practice of this network, the Metro Network for Social Justice in the 1990s, and particularly the practice of what we called at the time economic and political literacy. So as I mentioned, in Toronto and in the 1990s, this was a period right after the fall of the Berlin Wall. It was a period of the appearance and the kind of forceful advancement of the discourse of neoliberal globalization. In Canada, it was in the aftermath of a major national scale struggle against the signing of a free trade agreement with the United States. And so we had an anti-free trade movement in Canada that, has proven to be very prophetic given what's happening right now. But that was the context in the 1990s in which that social justice network came together to contest the discourses of globalization and to defend the welfare state from, the kind of attacks that were being mounted on the welfare state. In these economic and political literacy workshops, we worked with the member organizations of the network. So we were about 100 to 150 community organizations, community social service organizations, churches, labor unions, different kinds of community groups, women's shelters, a whole range of community organizations that felt in the 1990s the need to work together more intensely to try to confront the threats that we face together. And the network came together really to contest cuts to the local welfare state in the municipal budget, and then expanded to contest elections and to educate for elections, to develop curriculum to explain major social policy debates that were underway, changes to Social Security reform, and so on. And our goals in organizing those economic and political literacy workshops were initially really around organizing. They were to bring people into campaigns, to animate those organizations to get involved, to build capacity, to build understanding of the issues and what was at stake, and to try to actually mobilize people to get involved. And so over the course of 5 or 6 years, we developed this roster of workshops, and we're doing, over 100 workshops per year. So this is the kind of practice that I want to talk a bit about today. That practice, which was a practice of movement building, capacity building, and movement building in a social movement network, was really driven at the time mostly by young feminist women who were involved in anti-poverty organizing. And significantly, a number of us had experience in Latin America and in Latin American solidarity activism. And through that activism, and to some degree through our own university education, we had encountered the work of Paulo Freire. Freire was a Brazilian educator in the 1950s and 60s who was working and had really developed a revolutionary method to teach literacy to adults. And we're talking in the context of Brazil, which was, even at that late date, still a quasi-feudal society, as Franz was saying, in which the masses of people were very, very poor and had little or no access to education. Freire developed a revolutionary pedagogy, which he later systematized in a book called Pedagogy of the Oppressed, in which he argued and developed a method in which the teacher would use words from the local people's environment to teach literacy. And in this way, we're treating the adult students as people who already had knowledge, people with knowledge, with experience, with a sense of the world that they could bring into the classroom or into the learning environment, and from the basis of their immediate experience in the world, begin to build a vocabulary and to build literacy. And Freire was animated by the belief that to read the word is to read the world. In other words, that he thought that literacy and this kind of teaching in this empowering manner was a way of also reaffirming the subjectivity of really, really oppressed and marginalized people. And in building their subjectivity, built their capacity to participate in a democratic society. Now, Freire's work was arrested, literally, by the onset of dictatorship in Brazil, and he was arrested and exiled. But it was in the context of that kind of authoritarian society that he developed that method, and then in exile actually systematized it in writing. And that method was characterized by a commitment to a dialogical process between teacher and student, between the real world experience of the student and the content that the teacher brought, and between the word and the world. Freire called his method a problem-posing method, and he juxtaposed that to the dominant method in schools at the time, which he called the banking method. So the banking method, was presumed a body of content. Freire was opposed to the banking method in education, which assumed a kind of fixed body of content that had to be kind of forced into the mind of the student. In contrast to that, this dialogical method posed the problems of the real world for discussion and as a basis to build vocabulary and to build literacy. So this was the kind of method and the kind of philosophy of education that we brought to this movement building education in these community workshops in Toronto in the 1990s. Because we were trying to, we were imagining a project of economic and political literacy, we drew on the work of the academic work in the field of Canadian political economy, in which we as activists and facilitators and educators were educating ourselves in critical perspectives about the economy, and then working to bring this kind of content into a dialogical workshop in which we worked with a variety of audiences through a problem-posing method to build on their own knowledge and to evoke more knowledge and insight, and in a dialogical manner, bring this kind of critical knowledge into the workshop. And, this proved to be very successful and very attractive, and it landed very well with many audiences, specifically, I would say, other white educated activists like ourselves, community workers like ourselves, senior citizens, white senior citizens who were educated in the kind of history we were talking about, heavily overlapping with church communities, and the white labor movement. These were the audiences that this content really worked with. What we quickly began to realize, however, is that when we went into other kinds of contexts, the content didn't land so well. So just for one concrete example, in a workshop I did with the Jamaican Canadian Centre, which was a big social service agency in Toronto, the same process that I'd used very, very successfully with these other kinds of audiences just didn't land with this audience of Jamaican community workers and Jamaican activists. In their case, and what we reflected on and what we really began to think we had to develop and incorporate was that their experience of the attacks on the Canadian welfare state or the history of the building of the Canadian welfare state was just not that relevant to their history as immigrants to Canada, as recent immigrants who came as temporary workers, as domestic workers, who were suffering from anti-Black racism, who were subject to police violence, who were having trouble, accessing education, basic services, were experiencing discrimination in housing, and so on. And so that kind of encounter with that kind of audience and the kind of disconnect that we experienced in teaching that, led to a real kind of re-examination of the content, but also how to work more effectively with the specificity of who the audience was and who we were, and the specificity of our own positionality as educators going into certain kinds of settings. I would say similarly, another interesting example is a workshop with the Chinese Canadian National Council. A very progressive organization in Toronto, still exists. But again, talking to a Chinese audience, Chinese Canadian audience, I encountered this kind of suspicion of the left and a suspicion of traditions of socialism and communism that kind of were threaded through our analysis of what was going on in Canada at the time. And of course, it was their experience as people who were coming from Hong Kong, largely, who had a real suspicion and terror of communism because of their experience with the Chinese state. So again, another experience of really being confronted by different kinds of histories, differential positioning of people in a process of trying to build, social justice politics together, but starting to really, really see the kind of multiplicity that we were dealing with in a context like Toronto, and the challenges that represented in that kind of social justice education or social movement education. Just a third example was going into the Native Canadian Centre. Again, an established social service agency in Toronto working with urban Indigenous people who clearly were part of the network, wanted to be part of the social justice network and contribute to that kind of political discussion. going into work with a group of urban, homeless, and poor Indigenous people to talk about voting in the municipal election, and having those Indigenous people say, well, you know, we're not Canadian citizens. We don't want to be Canadian citizens. We are citizens of our nations. So why is this election relevant for us? Why are these issues relevant for us? So that kind of exchange and dialogue, often difficult, often awkward, often full of ignorance, you know, led to an ongoing, thoroughgoing process of reflexivity on our part, and a constant kind of effort to refine and enlarge the kind of curriculum that we were imagining for the kind of politics that we were trying to build. And I think we were confronted regularly by the specificity of our own perspectives, the specificity of the kind of dominant left-wing analysis of the situation that we were facing in common, and the need to figure out how to think and talk differently about it. And we were also being confronted with our whiteness, and what that meant when you're trying to build a multiracial social justice network. So to those kinds of questions, I have found that anti-racist feminism and transnational feminism has had a lot to offer. And because we were also, you know, feminist ourselves, and we were in the women's movement, and we were thinking and talking about anti-racist feminism in Toronto at that time, you know, we were bringing also those perspectives to bear on what we were doing in the social justice network. And just to say a little bit about this, that, you know, the second wave of feminism, so the late 20th century wave of feminism, was acutely aware of the feminist movement's need to create its own knowledge. It was acutely aware of how women had been excluded as knowers through the whole, you know, history of Western knowledge, for example. And feminists articulated alternative theories of knowledge that took the lives and lived experience and embodiment of women seriously as a source of knowledge, and began to articulate what came to be called the feminist standpoint. And this was the basis of really an alternative philosophy of knowledge that would take very seriously the ordinary experience of women as women. Now, very quickly, feminists, and this initially in the white feminist movement, but came to recognize that women's experience was, of course, highly differentiated, and that within the feminist movement, the feminists were being confronted by very, very significant differences among women based on their positionality in society, based on race, based on sexuality, based on disability, based on religious difference, based on immigrant status. So these kinds of differences in women's status and women's lived experience had to be kind of accounted for in feminist theories of knowledge. And in the decades since then, feminism as both a political practice and an intellectual tradition has really developed very sophisticated ways of thinking about difference, thinking about inequality, and about how to build political coalitions, but also to build knowledge across difference. And in my view, these kinds of perspectives also have a lot to bring to pedagogical discussions about how to work across difference while also trying to build common politics. So feminists have talked, for example, about subjugated knowledges, about their own subjugated knowledges as women and diverse knowledges from women's diverse positions, but the need for subjugated knowledges to enter into conversation with each other. And that doesn't imply unanimity, it doesn't imply sameness, but it does admit to the possibility of dialogue across those subjugated positions. And that this can become the basis for a reimagined coalition politics that's not based on unanimity, but is based on difference. And this is an incredibly important insight, I think, for emancipatory education, but also for emancipatory politics. And it is a very important lesson that is still being learned on the left, because it's in a lot of tension with priorities on the left for unanimity and for unity, you know? So feminism has been a very important kind of counter tradition that shares a kind of very important and essential critique of capitalism, but also a recognition of difference and the need and the possibility of working across difference. The last thing I really want to talk about is the challenge represented by the Indigenous resurgence and the politics of Indigenous sovereignty in Canada and elsewhere. And that is that the kind of social justice education that I've been talking about, that's been informed by traditions on the left and by feminism and by Latin American liberation movements and so on, that this kind of emancipatory practice has really been premised on commitments to liberal democracy. And with it, the kinds of principles of inclusion, participation, redistribution, etc., within a common political community. Now, granted, it has involved a critique of capitalism and even anti-capitalist politics, but it's been premised on a common political community. And the resurgence of Indigenous peoples in the Americas has really troubled those assumptions. And very significantly, you know, it has demanded for those of us in the Americas to recognize that our liberal democratic states are settler society states. These are states that have been superimposed on Indigenous territories and have been founded on the genocide of Indigenous peoples. And so it has involved a reckoning with our own kinds of understandings and commitments to democracy within those political frameworks, and of really engaging with Indigenous difference and engaging with claims to Indigenous sovereignty. So in other words, reimagining sovereignty on these territories as shared sovereignty, but also recognizing a certain primacy to Indigenous sovereignty. And that's a kind of reimagining of democracy and reimagining of the relationship between different kinds of social justice movements. And that's enormously challenging for our emancipatory traditions. And maybe the last thing I'll say about that is that it's not just about reimagining democracy and reimagining sovereignty, but it's also it's engaging with a kind of cosmological and civilizational difference that is beyond the heretofore imagining of even the best thinking on the left. For example, in Indigenous cosmologies, the notion that the land is alive, the notion that non-humans have agency, have citizenship in a sense, that existence is imbued with spirit in a way that the kind of modern world has repressed. And so the emancipatory traditions of modernity are being confronted by colonial difference in this sense, and it is forcing us to reimagine our commitments and to reimagine how it is that we can imagine, operating together democratically, and also democratic forms of knowledge building and education. In the last couple of minutes I'll just talk very quickly about how some of this translates or has translated for me into university teaching. So I would say very concretely, it has meant for me, as others have said, treating the students as knowers who bring their own experience and perspectives into the classroom, and that this knowledge and experience becomes a source with which we build knowledge together and in a dialogical fashion. In the same way that I, as a teacher, present myself as a knower with a particular standpoint and perspective, and that perspective has informed the logic and the content of the course that we're about to undertake together. But the point is that it's to talk about the course and its logic as a particular perspective, not as an objective body of knowledge that they're expected to swallow whole, but as a perspective into which I invite them to interact. So it's an invitation to respectful, open-minded, and critical dialogue with me as a teacher, and also with the authors that we read together and with each other as students. So this way of proceeding in a university setting is an instance also of an epistemology of partial perspectival and positional knowing that comes directly out of the social movement traditions that I've been talking about. And it's a way of relativizing all knowledge positions while also inviting students to critically interact with them within a commitment or to try to foster a disposition to social solidarity. So there's a kind of underlying principle that we're trying to build social solidarity, but within that there is an openness, a constant openness to inquiry and an assumption of pluralism. So just in closing, I would say that all the teaching I've done at the university level over the last 20 years has been characterized in building courses too, I would say, that I've incorporated these 4 underlying commitments. One is a global perspective that incorporates knowledge of the North-South relationship, global North, global South, the history of European colonialism and imperialism, and the hegemony of discourses based on Western civilization. Like, that's the first thing. So a global perspective, a critical global perspective in that sense. Secondly, an agency-centered perspective that highlights the practices and the contradictions of social justice movements and their efforts to change the world in better directions, and the difference that their practices have made historically. So that's an agency-centered perspective. Thirdly, I would say a postmodernist approach, in the sense that involves this kind of questioning of liberalism, questioning the emancipatory traditions of modernity in the ways that I talked about in encountering Indigenous people. That this seems to me to be very, very important, even as it's also important to not be naive, especially right now, about the rise of the illiberal right. And I can say some more about this in the Q&A if we want to talk about that. And then finally, a transnational feminist perspective, meaning, in addition to all of the above, an attention to the intersection of multiple oppressions that arise from race, class, gender, sexuality, religion, nation, among others. That this is a critical kind of insight brought by feminism that's absolutely essential to liberating education, and to situate these within capitalist colonial histories. And so these kinds of critical approaches to me have been, fundamental, and in kind of company with culture of dialogue and respect and warmth and friendship in learning. Okay, I'll leave it at that. Thanks.
thank you very much, Janet, for the effort to try to combine those principles with a real context problem that sometimes in Europe we cannot understand pretty well because we lack of knowledge about that condition. But at the same time, I think that we can conclude that those principles can be really suitable for addressing any kind of problems. And I think it reflects the real idea of inclusion. So it is not just something for some group, but all principles critically related to any kind. Thank you very much for that. Okay, so I don't know if you have anything else to add right now, or we go directly to the questions. Okay, so Franz and Henry, I have a couple. I'm gonna check my hearing again. I think it's gonna solve it very fast. But meanwhile, I can ask you the first question. That is for all three people that talk today. It is and it is a little bit complicated. That as we can see, many progressive educational movements emerge after periods of social crisis, war. So the question is, are we currently living through another historical moment that requires radical different educational models, in your opinion, or not?
May I answer to that?
Yes, you can.
I was talking about politics and the brackets of education in the history of the world. If you look at what gives me a positive thought is if you look at the history of dictatorship in the history of humanity, then very often dictatorship destroyed itself. And that's my big hope at the moment. And damage, but in the end, it did not succeed in most of the ways. What I hope for the educational system and for the school system is that more children who have experienced this kind of school go into schools or go into the educational system themselves. I think, I don't know, Henry can say something to that too, but I have experienced that a lot of children who went through a free school, through a democratic school, in this school system as we have today, don't see anything that motivates them to become a teacher, which is very sad, because then the effect is that the teachers who have to, in the best case, experience or teach in this with this free attitude, haven't experienced it themselves and can't really live it. And that's, I think, one of the biggest problems that we have nowadays. We need more people to be in these free schools, to experience democracy, to really learn what it's about. And then I think we have more resilience in society.
Yeah, I think on I think that there's a general a lot of feeling at the moment of people wanting change. I think from parents that's happening very strongly. I think pupils within traditional education are feeling that very strongly. I think that when we look at the role of, if you will, the role of education, I think that people are looking and not matching up. We're seeing today much more, not necessarily people looking at the educational side of it and thinking, for example, the AI, the world is changing so quickly. Why are we still doing a very dated system of education? But actually, one of the biggest things we're seeing today is mental health problems. Children are very evidently suffering actually in an environment where okay, people might say that that has always been the case, I think at the moment people are looking and going, I don't want this anymore. I want change now. I think that that's happening much more. Whether people are doing it almost with their feet. You know, homeschooling has grown massively. Lots of people are starting to look at, or even creating their own schools. There's lots more, much smaller sort of environments. But I think also I will just say is I think that in relationship to the Freinet situation, I'll just mention Derry Hannam, who put a lovely comment and talking about the wonderful book he has about implementing democratic principles within the state system. I think people who work, teachers who work within state system, are looking and feeling like, wait a minute, I want to change the way this is working. This is not working right, and they can feel it's not working right. So I think I would say that I feel that there is maybe again, I don't know, you know, going back, I mean, talking about Freinet, I mean, A.S. Neill and Freinet were about the same kind of time. You know, we know that back at the beginning of this century, or sorry, the last century, there were many people looking to change education and were looking for more free styles of education, and hopefully change will happen. And I do think that there is change happening, and hopefully on a much bigger perspective. Yeah, I think I will just say from my perspective, I've always had this kind of feeling that we need to take 2 steps back before we can take 1 new step forward. And I kind of feel we're in that situation with education. We keep kind of taking a step forward in a system that we've actually created with a lot of harm in the beginning. And I almost feel that there needs to be a bit of a rejig. Now, whether that's possible or not, I don't know. Maybe that's a dream. But I sort of feel that there's sort of things are, you know, we look to try and fix things, but the core is maybe is a bit difficult. So
I'll just make a quick comment on the state of university education as I see it, and that is that you know, it's extremely helpful to remind ourselves of these histories, right? The histories of debate over reform in education and claims of marginalized populations on education systems. Like in the US right now, of course, you know, there's the all-out attack on so-called wokeness, which is an attack on, you know, critical race theory and on feminism in universities. And of course, Black movements, civil rights movement, and women's movements. This was you know, getting access to universities for education, number one, but secondly, to actually fight over curriculum, establish disciplines like women's studies or critical race studies, establish spaces for that kind of critical thinking. You know, it says something about the power of that it's now being so targeted for destruction and for elimination. And, you know, it's quite inspiring to me to read the statements by the National Women's Studies Association in the US that recognizes that the struggle for Black education and for feminist education, of course, started long before women's studies departments existed in universities. It started when women were gathering in consciousness raising groups and Black churches were educating Black children. You know, like these efforts and desires for critical education have to be sustained by people who feel the need for that, even though at this moment there's a concerted attack on the institutional gains that have been made. And so there will need to be another round of revolution fought over education systems. I think that's really clear. In university education in Canada, I mean, we see a really, again, a disgusting kind of emphasis on job readiness and on technical education, and, you know, to the detriment of giving people space to think in that holistic way about the world. What is going on in the world, and how do we as humans be good humans in the world? And you know, the assault on that kind of space for thinking is everywhere. So it seems to me that we are in that kind of a crisis, and it is going to call out for another generation of radical reformers.
Very nice. Thank you very much for your opinions and comments. Well, I have another question that is a little bit related to this one. But before that, I'm going to recommend all the attendees to check the chat because they're having some interesting comment that maybe could be of your interest as well. So, but following with that idea of what is the current moment we are living for trying to get more democratic schools. In your opinion, to what extent are contemporary schools structurally incompatible with democratic, emancipatory, or liberatory education? How far we are getting that?
Well, I've experienced in schools every time that I tried to introduce some kind of democratic function, some kind of, I'm talking about state schools, I'm not talking about the Freinet school or the Summerhill school, but as soon as you try to implement some kind of democratic way of organizing the day at school or the curriculum or whatever, immediately it seems as if I call it now the system, maybe it's a headmaster, maybe it's somebody in school, immediately it develops some kind of fear of what this is going to head to. And that's I thought was always really weird. And I think very often an outcome of the societal situation and maybe still a relic of this century-long feudal side of society. But there are too few people who realize how positive or good it can be to just listen to each other or be able to add up in ideas and come together to create something positive and something constructive. You need the group, you need the society to do that. And whenever it was possible, something big came out of it. And so we just need to kind of, as we say in German, steter Tropfen hüllt den Stein. If every drop of water takes a bit of the stone away. So that's the way to do it, I guess, and not give up.
Yeah, and maybe I'd sort of add that we know that especially within traditional education, people who are on the forefront, the teachers who are actually on the forefront, are finding it very, very difficult. You know, there's a lot because of the expectation of the actual model of the school, and then the control of that happening with the needing to happen to the children to create the expectation, to fulfill the expectations of the school. They have been suffering. It's a continuous struggle. But I feel also now that people are wanting to make have those sort of changes, those improvements sort of happening, and coming back to again what Franz was saying about the Freinet of the relationships that are having that, you know, creating much more healthy kind of environments. I believe it's very possible. I think that people are making changes, and I think that is happening, but they're working under a system that is still restricting so much, and that they're finding that very difficult. But I think that the want is there. But I think I'll probably agree with Franz that I think it is a slow, you know, bit by bit. You know, people are trying things, people are looking and thinking. So I think especially around the conversation of well-being, because that I say that hasn't been a focus. Maybe to the level that I would see it. I would almost say it hasn't been a focus within education. You know, the education is very, very strict. It's the expectations are so high on sort of the factor side of it, if you will. And now that sort of social emotional side, people are wanting change. They're seeing that is a much, well, a much bigger demand. So I think I probably agree as well that sort of slowly but surely, more and more things, lovely things coming about, and people seeing that that's working better, but maybe not. You know, maybe the push, maybe something needs to flip hard, and no, we need to push hard on this. You know, we need to maybe that's the way. We need a leader. Janet needs to take on. You need to.
Well, I was just going to say that. I mean, in response to Miguel's question, to me, it seems important to reiterate that, in my view, public schooling was a historic achievement, I think. When you think about who had access to education, who had access to literacy, and, you know, with all the critiques of formal schooling, and there are many, and they're important, I still sort of instinctively think we need to defend public schooling, I think, you know, and fight over it. And at least in the Canadian context, you know, there have been also lots of experiments within public systems to create diverse school spaces within those systems. And again, I think in the current moment, there are a lot of forces operating against that and trying to create more homogeneity and more and becoming more authoritarian, you know, and I think teachers are feeling the pressure of that. And but I guess my own instinct is to say we have to defend it, but I'd be interested to hear if other people had other ideas about that. But I think, and even, you know, in, like, for example, Indigenous people in Canada, you know, Indigenous, they have had terrible traumatic experiences in public schooling, but the solution is not to abandon schooling. It's to take over schooling, like to take over make their own schooling system, and fight for the right for that, and fight for the resources for that, and fight for the teachers, and fight for, you know, to have Indigenous curriculum in mainstream schools, and fight for language instruction, and fight for education of non-Indigenous publics, you know. So to me, like, the public system is a terrain of struggle that has been hard won, but it's a ground game, you know, and we're losing ground, but I don't think we should cede the ground. That's sort of my instinctive reaction.
I was maybe I can add something, because Janet just brought me the idea. When I was at school, very often I tried to use Freinet principles in the system, and my field was the children or the youth with disabilities. And at some point, I realized that this movement of inclusion, it doesn't work really well at the moment, at least in Germany it doesn't, but this system, or this idea of bringing people with disabilities into school, did the school system really, really good, because it brought the idea away from judging over others, from the outlooks or whatever, just thinking differently and opening their heads for other possibilities. And it's brought a lot of change in the movements to support people with disabilities, and a change in the attitude towards weakness, in whatever kind it is, and that is whatever kind of weakness it is. And I think in this field especially, there's been a lot of change, and there's been a lot of development. And so I was very positive that if changes come, they probably have to grow into the school system from the bottom and grow higher up all the way until those who experience this heterogeneity in school grow up to be grown-ups and become teachers or headmasters themselves. Then the major change is possible, as Henry said. That's my hope.
I mean, I would absolutely agree as well that the public system is actually the thing that where I would say that that's where we want to be putting the energy. That's where we want to be. That's what we want to be fixing. That's what we want to be supporting. From my, I mean, I think that there's obviously from our perspective, we are a very, very small private school, and today I think that people are sort of almost being sort of being forced, if you will, to try, and the only way we can try and create something a bit different is to create it our own way and work within those perimeters to try our hardest. And I know a lot who are struggling exactly with that, who are really finding it difficult. But that's not the answer. The answer is not to have lots of little sort of private places. You know, that's absolutely. I mean, when thinking, if I think back at Summerhill's sort of history, really, it was the only way that Summerhill is able to practice what it's practicing under the system that we're in today. And it is, and even that it's a major struggle because it keeps creeping in. But you know what I see with some of the work that we do through our CIC and some of the courses we offer and bits and pieces like that is see how many people are so keen to make those changes within traditional areas. And I think I mean, I just saw in the chat that Derry Hammond mentioned it again about the sort of the well-being, having well-being and the sort of the academics sort of sincerely equally looked at and creating, you know, I don't feel that there's a hell of a lot that needs to happen. Give some more autonomy, give some more freedom, allow some more of those wonderful childhood needs that need to come through, you know. Yeah, that's so I would absolutely agree that that's the area we need to that's the area where most of the energy needs to go. You know, I have heard of you know, there's within the UK there's lots of people who are trying to make those changes within that, talking about the future of education, talking about what's going to happen tomorrow, and I'm liking the fact that a lot of the conversations within that are including the well-being and are including the social emotional development of the child, rather than it being, you know, that sort of, so rather than thinking, okay, so how can we gain the educational expectations from the children in a way that they're not scarred from it, in a way that it's not forceful or you know, and for me that's a 2 steps back, 1 new step forward. We need to look at different ways of doing that rather than let's try and manipulate the system at the moment to make it feel or look a little bit better, because I feel that there's still a lot of harm that's happening there, sort of thing.
I think that one way of doing it is also breaking the walls between the school and society. That is, meaning that bringing the parents into school, not just because I saw that a lot of problems arose because the parents didn't know what was happening at school. So if you bring in this triangle of education, always happens between the teacher, the child, and the parents. And if you cut off one of these corners in the triangle, then you have a problem. And that I think I always experienced that the schools where the parents were included as they wanted to be included, those were the best schools that I had worked in. So communication, we've been talking about it all day. The communication and exchange is what we need, and openness. And then we see.
Okay, so now we're gonna go with a funny question, of course, related to this. Well, according to your experience, if Freinet, Freire, and Neill were to design right now a school, what aspects of contemporary education would they most strongly challenge? Change and change.
The undemocratic system. What would you say, Henry?
Yeah, I
not listening to the child.
I think not listening. I think the sort of the individualization, you know, the fact of the classic. I was just sort of thinking the very classic kind of you know, everyone's seen that picture of all of the animals, the tree and all of the animals, including a monkey, You know,
Just
that
thinking of that too, yeah.
yeah, that kind of sort of factory, you know, this is how we do it. You know, I've always found that looking at the line of traditional education, there's it's a very, very thin line. And so for the ones who are below, it's pulling people up to it, and the ones who are above, it's pulling them down. And it's creating and I've always sort of felt that and the methods, if you will, you know, there's a lot, the diversity, that those sort of conversations that are coming over, it starts to be looking at the individualization and bits and pieces, but there's so much more work there. Democracy, autonomy, probably those would be the sort of things, I think, for Franz, isn't it? I think there's sort of probably I'd put the free play. Probably I'd put the AS Neill would put free play, I think, and as much opportunity to play. But you know, whether that's very realistic or not, I'm not sure. Maybe that's too far in the dream zone. I'm not sure.
Yeah, you were talking about this caricature about the tree and the teacher giving the different animals the task, and now the task for today is to learn how to climb the tree, talking to an elephant, for instance. So, and that's I think the big problem. I would think that Freinet would say the biggest problem is judging over others. This that society teaches us to judge over others. Oh, he's white. Oh, I know. He's a gay guy. Oh, now I understand. Things like that, and putting people into categories. That is causing a lot of damage, because that closes the head, and that closes gives the situation of meeting the person unconditionally a big blowback. So I think that is what was one of the major motivations for this new era school movement, and this comparison of schools of nowadays, the PISA tests. You have those in England too, yeah. I think they are very, very damaging for the school system, really damaging. And I don't find many people who understand that. And it's just this comparison of personalities. And I mean, the field that Janet works in, if you start comparing people, it's like, what the hell are you doing? That's ridiculous.
Yeah, the segregation to a certain extent, isn't it? Yeah.
When I was listening to others talk about, you know, Freinet and Neill, and thinking about Freire, I mean, I'm struck by the humanism of these people, like, and their desire and their love for humans, you know, human beings, and their desire to foster people's humanity and recognize people's humanity, and especially among populations that were marginalized and not didn't have access to power and knowledge. And you know, that kind of humanism, again, you know, there are critiques of humanism, but I'm struck by that, and I think that they would probably be aghast at a lot of what we see today in educational priorities. And I think the other thing that comes to mind is that they also really affirmed the importance of the learner engaging the world, you know, engaging the world and learning about the world and interacting with the world. And, you know, that kind of worldliness at whatever scale, to me, is also so a major thread in these thinkers, and so important, and I think is also in danger at present.
Yeah. We have to overcome patriarchism.
But it seems to be the answer very close to the things that they challenge in the moment. So I'm not sure if we did make a lot of progress on those. So of course we are better than in the 20th century, so we cannot be so pessimistic. But it is true that there is a long way to go in those fields that you mentioned.
Okay, and what about the teachers? In your opinion, what kind of teacher mindset is required to sustain a democratic and emancipatory educational environment, without failing, of course, into burnout or frustration? That is also another problem that we are facing right now with the teaching staff.
What struck me a lot in my teacher's training, I got a normal university teacher's training and went through the mills of this system. And what struck me most was that there were people who really tried to prevent open and free ideas. In my studies in the 80s in Hamburg, in Germany, that's the time when I got to know the ideas of A.S. Neill, and that's what got me into this different kind of education. Then in my first exam at the university, A.S. Neill and Summerhill education was the topic of my exam. And they were very positive and they thought it was good what I was doing there. But as soon as I got into my practical studies, they forced me into the brackets of the system, and I had to function again. But as soon as you get out of it, as soon as you get the ticket to become a teacher, and as soon as you are in school, that's what really counts. And I can only encourage everybody to keep an open mind, everybody to try to get the ticket to be able to work as a teacher. I mean, you have the possibility to do this teacher training and get the state degree to be able to work in any public school, or you have the alternative to not do that and only be able to work in free schools, which is good too. But as Henry also said, and I think too, if we want to have major changes, we have to do that in the public school. And anybody who becomes a teacher just then shouldn't let himself be suppressed by ideas that believe in nothing should change, because the world is changing, everything is changing, and so here we are. So it's very much up to us what we make of it.
I think one of my the things I was thinking about when I was preparing for this is the tension or the challenge, I guess, of the teacher, or both bringing their best intelligence and a kind of political clarity and commitment, which I think is essential, ethical, political clarity and commitment, in combination with openness, like the tension between those two things, because I don't think just openness is enough, or pluralism without some kind of ethical grounding is enough. And that, to me, that is an inescapable tension. And I don't know how one teaches that, but I think that that is really important in emancipatory teaching and emancipatory education. That kind of tension between commitment and openness. And I think going back to something that Franz said, that it strikes me that one of the biggest barriers to openness, and that turns political commitment into dogmatism, is fear. And it's a fear of actual conversation, and a fear of exchange, and a fear of engaging difference. And, you know, to me, it's a question and a challenge. How do we cultivate those dispositions, not only in teachers, but in humans, you know, because this is the ground for democratic functioning as well, is hard thinking about the world, about the problems that we face, about how to navigate them, and at the same time, a capacity to listen, to negotiate, to navigate, to hold ground, but also to cede ground, and to be open to difference.
And that is very much a question of education, openness. And that's why we need good schools, we need good education, we need I don't know the English word nachhaltig. It's that it really sustainable results, sustainable education, and yeah.
Yeah. I think I'd agree with all. I think you know, when I would sort of think of because teachers have a passion and an interest, and they have you know, I was sort of thinking of that lovely childhood realm of imagination and inspiration and all those lovely things. And I think that relating a bit to what Franz and Janet said, that you know that the system itself can start to put a lot of restriction on that, and so it can become, you know, even that can be just very, very difficult. And yeah, I would agree with that fear as well. I think that there's many different angles to that, and I would agree that that is another thing that's very challenging. Yeah, if I literally just go to a Summerhill classroom, one thing that I see is a child who's sincerely interested and enthusiastic and passionate about what they're there to learn, and I see a teacher who's wearing the same jacket, who wants to help, wants to teach, wants to inspire, wants to bring all of these lovely things to the table. And I think even that is so hard, it's so difficult, and I think teachers really feel that. So I don't know necessarily whether my answer to it would be that the teacher needs to change. I think a lot of teachers still have that, and I think a lot of teachers, you know, bring interest. I did a talk at a university, a group of university students, and the leader of the group, they were training teachers, and the leader of the group sort of pointed to this one young man and said, "This guy has got to come and work at Summerhill. You should see him in the classroom. He's inspirational. He wants to individualize. He's on the side of the child all the time. He's working with them, and he's doing all this beautiful stuff." And I said, "No, he needs to stay there. He's the one. He's doing good stuff right there. You know, that's what we want. You know." I think holding on to that lovely inspiration that I think a lot of people teachers have, you know, and I feel that again going back to that lovely part I talked about earlier about relationship. You know, it's that wonderful opportunity to build wonderful relationship between a teacher and a learner, a mentor. You know, however you want to call that situation. You've got someone who's enthusiastic to learn, and you've got someone who's enthusiastic to teach, you know, and is passionate about it. And yeah, good quality human values. Maybe.
One thing that was for me always very important, that I always emphasized that the children have the right to say no at any time. And that is really important, because very often they have people around them who say, "No, you have to function," and nobody has to function.
So, okay, thank you very much. Well, now I have a little sensitive question, and it's going to go to Janet, but I can help but ask it because I think it's important from the European perspective. I think you're going to understand right now, because Janet mentioned the colonial challenges and encounters with indigenous perspectives, but of course our situation in other parts of the world is quite different. So I would like to ask, what's the role of Europe in this, specifically in Europe, but it's always, we can add as well different places where people are not used to living with indigenous people, and how can European emancipatory traditions avoid reproducing these colonial assumptions that we usually do, while still remaining committed to universal ideas of justice? Tricky question, I know.
Are you asking me, or are you asking the
Yes.
Europeans?
No. I'm asking directly to you. You are the expert in this, definitely. So
I mean, to me, the colonial question is everywhere in the world. It's a global question. It's not simply a question for the Americas, you know. I just think it materializes differently in different contexts. I mean, in the European context, I think, for example, I think the challenge is to recognize the history of European colonial domination and how that lives in the present, and how it lives in our knowledge systems, and also how it lives in our social relations. And so the emancipatory traditions of the West have developed in a context of European colonial control, you know, and so we have to interrogate those traditions constantly, and we have to interrogate them in dialogue with colonial difference. So, and how that's encountered in different contexts. So, I mean, some obvious things to think about in the European context, I think, are the status of non-European immigrants in Europe, you know, people of non-European ancestry living in Europe, non-Christians in Europe, and just how these people are positioned in education systems and elsewhere, and the need to dialogue and to find bridges and to find ways of thinking together about a common future. So I think that the question is everywhere in the world, but it has to be posed. Like I say, it materializes in distinct ways, I think. But to me, this is a very enduring question about the emancipatory traditions of modernity, because they've so shaped our progressive political movements, right? And it's not that they, it's not, I'm not, there are things about these traditions that I think are absolutely essential, and I'm not ready to jettison them, but we have to interrogate them in an ongoing way. So it's the same kind of thing we're saying about education in general, is about how to be grounded in the values and the kinds of visions of the best of those traditions, while also opening them, making them permeable to questions and challenges that seem foreign to them. And I mean, I'll just give a very concrete example. I mean, I consider myself a feminist from birth, you know, and feminism is very, very indebted to, you know, those Western emancipatory traditions. But when feminism encounters women's situations and in other world regions, and or in indigenous contexts, for example, you know, we find big challenges being made to feminist presuppositions about freedom, about what does women's freedom look like? What should it look like? How do we imagine it? How do we imagine gender relations? How do we imagine care work? I mean, these questions have different histories and different, they're being formulated differently in different places, you know? And yeah, so just to say that what I think feminism is showing us is how to engage in the question. It's not about the answer. It's about how to engage with difference, with deep difference. And I think that's a task for everybody in the world, you know, regardless of where you are. And because the colonial question is a global question. I don't know, those are just some initial thoughts on that.
No,
Yeah,
yes.
it's also a very important question of also respect. If you look at that's why I brought in this historical aspect in my speech. It's very popular here, and it was very popular in German to analyze your genes on online, and it was very interesting then to see that there's some some groups who bring people together and analyze the genes, and that nobody is 100% German, nobody is 100% French, nobody is 100% Brazilian. That we are a mixture of different kinds of genes from all over the world. I have a part Russian in me, I have a part Scottish in me. Hello, Henry. And I've got, and I'm only to 20% Germanic. So it's really ridiculous to even think in categories of racism. It's really weird. If you would analyze the worst racist, he would kind of probably fall backwards if he hears what kind of genes he has.
No, that's absolutely true. And on the other hand, anti-racist movements or racialized people also talk about the importance of talking about race.
Yeah.
So there's a debate, like that's exactly there's a conundrum there, So just a very concrete example just came to mind about, the colonial question. Like I'm living in Quebec, and right now there is a law in Quebec that makes it illegal for people working in the public sector or in professions of authority like teaching to wear any kind of visible religious symbol. And this law has been passed in the name of defending Quebec values. And those values being the values of laïcité, secularism. And also, so secularism being the primary one, laïcité. But the effective target of that law is Muslim women who wear headscarves.
I would think so, yeah.
Okay, so that's an example of how an emancipatory discourse is being weaponized against a colonial other. So in the context of Quebec society, this is really a weapon of Islamophobia. And it's profoundly sexist as well, because it's targeting women in this particular way, and it's essentially forcing Muslim women who are employed as daycare workers, primary school teachers, nurses, etc., to basically, they're being fired because of their choice to wear something on their head.
Or deny their religion.
So that is an example, right? That's an example of the weaponization of an emancipatory discourse that comes out of a European experience and is being applied in this way to demonize and otherize those who are deemed to be aliens to a political tradition and a political community. So, that's an example of how, and feminists in Quebec are split on that. So you have feminists who will defend the law because they're horrified, number one, at any kind of notion of religion in the public space, because of the history of Catholicism in Quebec and the history of Catholicism in women's oppression in Quebec, all very important history to know. But another part of the women's movement says this is ridiculous and terrible to be targeting Muslim women in this way, and that we have to recognize a certain kind of plurality in relations to religious traditions. So, this is an example of a debate, ferocious debate within feminism, and that hinges on what's putatively an emancipatory claim by the government. So it's a very concrete, very messy, clear to me, but messy situation.
Yeah.
Okay, so well, thank you very much, because it was becoming more and more interesting, the conversation, but unfortunately we are about to finish our first edition of this riveting symposium. So I don't know if you want to give some advice to our audience or something related to the topics that we talked just briefly, just so we can wrap up the session.
I can just encourage everybody who studies, who wants to become a teacher, who brings in this passion to become a teacher. As Henry said, I also think that becoming a teacher, you have to have a certain kind of passion to not let his mind be suppressed, and to really study these new era education. It's very, very interesting, and it opens your heart, it opens your mind, and then go and see schools which are that way. Even if you maybe don't have the guts to work in a school like that, you don't have the capability, the ways, or whatever, but to study it and to know about it is really opening the mind, and the society needs that.
Yeah, I'm not too sure necessarily. I love what you said there. I agree with that. I think I don't know really whether I would sort of say if you're here, then you're a step in the right direction, really, isn't it? And I think lots more work in that direction. I think that especially as a teacher, I would agree. I mean, I was sort of trying to think about sort of parents and families as well. I think that people feel very they see a lot of problems that are happening with their children within traditional education, and I think that they're, to be thinking about ways of changing that, to be looking at looking at alternatives, looking at other things that might be out there, or changing things yourself, and maybe, not sure. I could probably do something a bit better, but I'm not quite feeling it, or not sure at the moment. But that's, think about the families. I think parents are, they're having, there's a lot going on at the moment. Yeah, and I think families are seeing that there's a lot of pressure there. There's a lot going on, and it's hard. And persevere, maybe.
Yeah, and maybe I would say that this conversation reminds me that, it reminds me of the pitched struggles for education, and how people have been persecuted and arrested and killed for this. And that the struggle for this continues, and it's going to become more pitched in our own time. And that we need to just encourage each other to fight that fight.
Yeah.
Pretty true. Okay. Well, so thank you very much. The only thing left is to appreciate and to thankful your participation here as well. Thanks to the audience that we have today. And well, we hope to have more editions and more activities related to this one. So for me, it was a great pleasure to have you here. And of course, we're gonna keep going with this topic. So thank you very much. Now we are gonna stop the record, and well, see you soon. Bye bye.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, lovely. Thank you all very much.
Thank you. It was fun.
Very nice.